Welcome to the World of Rare Disease, a show that focuses on awareness and education about rare and complex disorders. My name is Lisa Deck, and I am a rare disease patient, a Rare New England board member, and your host for today's show. Today, our show features Living in the Light, a dynamic and beautiful patient advocacy initiative. Utilizing the potency of fine art photography, compelling personal narratives, and engaging filmmakers, Living in the Light educates the biotech and medical community about the realities of rare diseases and the unprecedented effect they have on families and daily life. I'm thrilled to have two members of the Living of the Light team with us today. I'd like to welcome Levi Gershkowitz and Jeff Reinhardt to our show. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Thank you for being here.
Well, we're actually here in our office, but it's nice to see you and connect this way.
Absolutely. This is the way of the world, being here together. This is what we have. Although we are all in Massachusetts, so look at that. I wanted to jump right in, and I was going to ask you to just do a brief introduction of what each of you do in your roles in the organization of Living in the Light.
Sure. Why don't I start, since I was the founder of Living in the Light. So my role is as CEO, and yet I also get to still work with families, photograph, interview, and edit. So I'm pretty much a part of almost all of our operations, which I love. We're a small team, and we function a lot more like a family than a team. So. But in terms of my role, it essentially was looking at a need, which was for patient stories to be told in an authentic and humanizing way. I can get a little bit more into the history of that, but I realized that it would be important for people's stories to be told and heard, and for them to be seen and understood as they are as people, as opposed to as patients. And so this is something that was a project of mine that I began in 2012, but since 2014, we've been incorporated, so functioning as a company. And Jeff has been along for much of the journey, so I'll let Jeff introduce himself and his role.
Yeah, I'm Jeff Reinhardt, and I'm the Director of Advocacy here, as well as the lead editor and writer. Historically, I came in 2014, and most of my work here has been with just our storytelling process, both editing with other writers, as well as crafting my own sort of style of ways to sort of distill these incredible stories that we hear from the rare disease community into sort of like what we call narratives. So sort of these short narratives, biographies of people living with rare diseases. And so covering a lot of ground in a short amount of text sometimes. Although when I now look at all of our materials, it's quite a bit of text. And the Director of Advocacy role comes into play more, I think, yes, this interaction with biotech. So, we're working alongside other patient advocates to bring the needs of the patient communities to those biotech companies, to show the diversity and resilience of those communities in a positive light, to create materials that are going to educate members of that industry about some of the needs and some of that patient population that they're trying to work for a fix to some therapeutic need. We're really widening the lens to talk about the larger life needs of these people. So discussions with people in that industry, sort of steering them towards the human component. We're basically both humanists in the basic sense, being humanists in the pharma industry.
Excellent. So that is a great leadway into Living in the Light and the mission and what is done by the group and the organization. tell me a little bit more about that. I know you mentioned how it got started, but talk a little bit more about the Living in the Light process and what it means to you and means to the patients as well.
Sure, I think I can start. I'll put out some things that are thematic, that are really important and part of our philosophy. Relationship is huge. So what Jeff was speaking to around being the director of advocacy, though a lot of our work is project driven, we may be working on telling the stories of individuals or families affected by a certain form of, say, lysosomal storage disease. We also know that outside of the guidelines and maybe the timeline of that particular project, it's important that we stay in the know as much as possible of what's going on the advocacy side for the hundreds of families that we have got the opportunity to meet, and for many of which built friendships. So staying in touch with folks, looking at what is going on in terms of legislation, which we're all dealing with right now, of kind of what are going to be the impacts of this pending election, and seeing Biden and Harris come in, and what impact is that going to have on the rare disease community. So this is something that right now we're educating ourselves on. So relationship thrives on communication. So a big part of what we do is uphold communication from all sides. So that's between members of industry. And when I say that, really, we're talking about biotechnology companies, pharmaceutical companies, research institutions, maybe specialty pharmacies, or folks that are involved in access or distribution, be it of drugs or therapies, or even folks running clinical trial sites. So we would kind of put a lot of those folks in from the science side, the development side, and distribution of medicines, FDA, all of that industry. But orchestrating and being involved in building bridges of communication to make sure that members of the patient community, those living with a child, a spouse themselves, maybe it's intergenerational, and we're talking about a family that has 9 people that are all affected across different age groups by a particular disease. How does communication work, and how are they being seen, listened to, and heard? And the key word there then becomes advocacy, patient advocacy, which is different than, and this is something that I would say, we talk about what's our mission. One thing that I think we've succeeded in, at least with the partners that we work with, is making sure that there's a clear distinction between marketing and advocacy. If you go back and you look traditionally at pharma, advocacy was, if it was used in the sentence, it would probably always be spelled in, with small letters, and marketing is like this whole department. But we really view that advocacy, if not its own, is an element of everything. So within marketing, how do we, how would a group look at advocacy? Within investor relations, what's the approach to advocacy with it? So the other thing, and I'll try to keep it succinct, but as you probably well know, Lisa, and many people watching, there aren't these silos and borders and boundaries. You're not like either in industry or you're a patient. How about a patient who works in industry? Or how about someone who has been in industry for years and then is a first-time parent and gets a diagnosis for rare disease? So because we navigate a lot of that, I think we're able to, Jeff had talked about the humanizing quality of our work is to continue day after day after day to make this a human issue. And so, we do a lot of events too, and I think about things like Rare Disease Day, but not, to be cliche, but like every day is Rare Disease Day for us. Like if I just look at the books that are on my desk, it's like the literature, the conversation that we're in, it's always Rare Disease Day. So keeping that potent and present, I'd say is a core principle. So yeah, I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Levi. That's excellent. Jeff, I'd love to hear your comments as well.
Well, I think in terms of communication, there's a constant balance. There's sort of a dialogue between, in terms of the rare disease community, which is a term that can, I think, generalize things in a sense, but also in its intricacy, there are so many different identities and so many different backgrounds of people who identify as either patients, caregivers, researchers, and developers. And so we're trying to create material that helps bring that distance that maybe from the outset appears to exist. And that can even be legally imposed distances, right? And try and narrow it to allow people a very close view. So what that requires, you know, the key word for me is trust and consent. And so when we work with families, that's sort of at the forefront of our approach is building trust with those families to, you know, to get rich storytelling and content, but on another level, like remain accountable to them as the process goes through. Unlike a lot of marketing where images are bought and sold and sort of, you know, next thing you know, your face is on a bus stop somewhere. We're very conscious about where our material goes, how it's being used, really with, as Levi said, the focus being, you know, educating and advocacy being the main focus. Now, is there a marketing component? Absolutely. And a lot of projects we do bridge all of that because the industry is becoming less siloed. You know, patient advocates are less siloed in industry. But the other side of it that I'll just say, the other balance of it is, you know, we're ethicists and we're artists, right? So we're, you know, when I look at a story, I'm looking at it in the context of having met, you know, dozens, written hundreds of stories of rare disease families and individuals. And so this tapestry develops. And when you step back and you look at it, it's a little different view than just seeing one story, two stories, you know, stuff like that. There's larger stories, larger trends and contexts that I think is helpful to educate, you know, people in medicine, for example, because, you know, I didn't go to a medicine program. I'm not trained at medical school or pre-med or anything, but I know people who do and who are, and this stuff is often at the end of their list of understanding disease. Is like, how does class or race or, you know, mental health affect, you know, what sort of, you know, we talk about comorbidities a lot in terms of clinical trials, but what about comorbidities in the world at large? And how do we create an understanding for that? So I view our work a lot as mission driven to create fuller pictures of people who some see as patients and we see as, you know, entire people.
Absolutely. I love this. So I am a rare disease patient, and I feel like personally, I kind of don't fit in one of those silos because I'm an advocate, I'm a patient, I'm a board member. You know, I fall into a lot of those. So I love, and this is when I first was introduced to Living in the Light was your website, and just seeing these stories of people, not just patients. And I think that's the beautiful work that you do. And I know at some point in the show, we're going to be highlighting some of those stories. But in talking about them, I mean, I think you have really found a combination of all the pieces in the rare disease world to kind of come together. But I loved seeing the different videos and movies and pieces that exist. And where do they go? Can you tell us a little bit about the process for that? So you meet these families, you get to know them, you create this beautiful work. What then?
Well, a lot of our material, you know, ends up in our clients' hands, you know, which, like Levi was saying, is, you know, biopharmaceutical companies and research universities and some patient advocacy firms, and that'll end up on their websites. We're really big into physical deliverables. So, for example, we create these sort of books, coffee table size, and you know, these books have very full, you know, photo spreads as well as like in-depth writing and stuff like that. And so these books will often end up in the hands of companies to educate their staff. Like they will buy a copy for everyone at their company to educate their staff about what they're working on, why they're trying to help people. And as well as beautiful photos and plaques on the walls of their spaces. But that's not the only places. I mean,
right. So like the books that Jeff mentioned, those also, we send complimentary copies to all participants in the project. And one of the reasons that's key and where we really thought to do these books, and now we have such a collection of it, is we all, to a degree, and especially during COVID times, live isolated lives. And if you are someone or a family affected by an orphan disease and something that's ultra rare, You may be the only person in your state. You may have not had the opportunity, or very rarely, to physically travel and actually spend time with someone else, or safely, or even have the ability to travel based on, what it takes to get out the door. And when we see that firsthand. So these books also create, between the two covers, a new community. So these may be 8 people who've talked on the phone, I'm thinking of one in particular that was in one of the books that we have here. This is an older gentleman and then a young, now teenager, who through Facebook would message like every week and never met each other. But when we learned about that connection, we were able to bring both of their stories together in one project. So they live in the same book. Their photos and stories hang on the same wall, in an office actually in Cambridge. So another Massachusetts connection. Obviously a lot of biotech is here in Cambridge. But to synthesize and to bring folks together, as well as to look at the difference, to say, okay, these folks have 2 very different metabolic conditions, but the impact that has on their daily lives or in these families may be very similar. And so the books are also a way of creating community and culture, which is part of what we are entrusting to our partners. We're saying, okay, it's your job, right, to grow this company, to get the science down, to gain approval so you can move into clinical trials, progress through the phases, and hopefully, actually commercialize and start to distribute a drug that's going to impact and change and better people's lives. Well, it's our job to make sure that while all that is going on, that the story and also the honor and respect and the grief is also present, because we well know that this is not a quick jaunt. It's not like, okay, in 2 years, we're going to be in the clinic. Okay, we're filing for approval. We're looking at 10, 13, maybe more years sometimes before that happens. And for those of you, that know this too well, I sympathize with you, because we know that the current generation of children, I often say children, living with rare genetic disease that doesn't yet have a treatment or a cure, likely will pass away from complications due to that disease. We're not yet there in a lot of places. So part of what we're doing is creating commemorative material, knowing that the people that we're spending time with, the photos we're taking and printing and publishing and distributing, will one day be memorializing of who those people are and were. And so that becomes part of a company's history as well, that you can't only focus on the horizon. We also need to look back and say it's upon the lives and the backs of these people that brought us to where we are now and are inspiring us to move forward. And also, just to answer the question, kind of what happens next, a lot of things we distribute through our website. So we have a digital bookshelf. If you visit FromPatientToPerson.com, I'm sure we can give the URL. There's a bookshelf, so you can virtually go through and read these stories. A lot of conferences back in the day, if you remember, when we all used to get on a whole bunch of room number am I staying in this time, or which hotel, but we would go to conferences and we would present there at our own booths or at our partners' booths to really presence it there. And we do lead some special events. Now we're doing more things online, where that's a way to actually bring people in and have their stories shared. So both in print, digitally, on the web, internally, there's a lot of use internally, like in corporate slide decks and presentations, and then through our kind of museum quality installations, which there are a number of throughout the US and internationally. So in time, it's getting out there, but your question also touches on a point, a question for us as a team of how do we create more bridges to make sure that this actually enters more of a public sphere, that this not remain siloed in industry, or that just because this is content that's been licensed to a biotech company, it doesn't lack educational value, say in a classroom, or for just a general educational material. So for those of you out there with ideas, this is something that we are wanting to engage in conversation around, and are very open to how to build this into the curriculum as new master's programs or even undergrad programs are founded throughout the US and internationally, of how can we get some of this content in there as people are looking to understand more about narrative medicine, about medical journalism. Of course, we have bioethics, which I think a lot of our content can influence, or medical anthropology. So there's a lot of intersections within academia and the humanities as well.
Right. Well, that's excellent. And I think, you know what, the more you talk about it, the more connections hear about it. And hopefully that is something that can become, you know, part of a learning curve for people, because I think that's key in the rare disease space. So talking about living in the light, I'd love for you to mention, you know, what is the most rewarding part, and what are some of the other gains you've had being part of this process and part of this, you know, really being a part of people's lives and sharing? I think you've mentioned it, but if you want to put you on the spot with one specific question.
I mean, the most rewarding, I think it's hard to think of just one. It's hard to think of just one thing, but getting to share, you know, to craft a story and then get to share it with it, you know, before any of our stories go to print, we make sure to get approval from the families or individuals we're working with. And that process of working on a story, working on someone's sort of biographic story with them, to me is really, you know, profoundly powerful. And I hope for them too, on some level, you know, not to speak for them, but that interpretive analysis is something that's so lacking at times in the medical industry. You know, people either tend to come with tons of information or decisions to make or stuff like that, but to be like, no, I'm here to interpret your story and to then reflect that back to you for a second interpretation. And it creates this cycle of like deepening understanding between people, people who, you know, have maybe more in common than they thought. And I always find things in common, even with people who on the surface I might not, you know. And so that, I think, for me is probably the most rewarding.
Yeah, and I would say for myself, it's multifaceted in terms of what's the most rewarding of the interactions that I have with families and participants in our project. There's a certain degree, and people may or may not experience this, you know, it's not a promised impact of our work, but there tends to be a high degree of catharsis. I've been the recipient of people many times thanking me or thanking the company for our work, saying, this was the first time in my life that someone who's not a doctor, who's not, you know, a specialist, who's not here to give me advice or tell me what to do or not to do, and who's not my family, you know, who's going to judge me or not for all these things, someone who's just is here to listen, is asking questions, and they say, who knows what to ask? Because we have developed a specialty. You know, we are in a niche that we fulfill as humanists, but with a high degree of understanding of genetics, of the physical body, of the drug development process, of the grieving process. I often feel on a couch next to a mom who just received a diagnosis 2 years ago for her child. I may have already met 30 kids with that illness at different ages. And there may be things that she or that family may experience that I've already heard about. And so though it's not my role, you know, there to advise in any way, it personally helps me to hold space in a way for not just what they're going through, but what they might go through soon or in the years to come. And that type of knowledge, or really it's wisdom, it's not knowledge, because it's not, you don't find it in any book. That type of space holding is one of the greatest benefits, that I can be there for someone who said, oh my gosh, I felt so alone, and this conversation is making me feel less alone. And I'm like, yes, and you're individual, you're unique, but let me introduce you to a number of other unique people who are on this path with you. And your question too about like, what are some of the additional things beyond that? For me now, leading a company, at times we're 7 people or more with some of our contractors as well, because I should say with COVID, we're not traveling anymore. It's become a travel kind of environmental practice, which is we're not getting on airplanes. So if we're about to meet a family in Northern Florida or in the Chicago area, it means that we are now going to work with local photographers, local folks to those places. So we're more so getting to grow our community that way. And one of the added benefits is how many lives this work gets to touch, including the teams, to see that I don't know how many of us, really get to say, hopefully you do, and many of us, but I feel genuinely good about the work that I do in the world. I believe in it. And I feel that it's my job and responsibility to help other folks, be them in industry, believe in their roles too.
Wow, that's excellent. I mean, I think, you have the words to say exactly what it means to you. And I think I'm in the rare disease space, and as a patient, I meet so many other patients, and I think it's just cool. And I think patients want to tell their stories. They want to matter, and they want to, find others like them. And I think, for 20 years, I've been a patient, and it was so hard to find other people like me. Mm-hmm. Now I can. I mean, social media, technology, things have changed. It's much easier, but I do think you have a really important job by bringing those people, or, bringing those similarities together to each other. So I love that you're doing that. So I know we could talk for hours about this. I kind of want to, but we can't today. Talking about living in the light. So I know there's multiple pieces, multiple stakeholders. If somebody wants to get involved, where should they go? What should they do? Give us the lowdown on that.
Absolutely. Well, we do have social media accounts, especially in LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. So those are ways to just connect with us, so that when we make posts, we're often, I would say, too busy to be posting, but if you don't see posts from us, it means we're actually doing something. Posts from us, it means it's like, well, what are we going to do? Let's make some social media posts. So there are often times when we're not putting up new content, but connecting with us through social media, because I think I put a post out on Facebook last week saying, hey, we have a project in Chicago right now where we're looking for 2 more participants. Do you or someone you live with have a rare disease that doesn't have an approved treatment, and you're between these ages? So we will sometimes kind of put the call out in that way. But also, if someone knows that they would like to be a participant in one of our projects, reaching out to us, I certainly believe and have been guided by a certain form of, I guess what we call divine intervention. So sometimes it's like someone reaches out and say, hey, I just got diagnosed with this form of pancreatic cancer, and I came across your website and I just wanted to say hi. And it's like 2 weeks later, we're doing a project and we need a participant with pancreatic cancer. So through our website, which is from patienttoperson.com, which I want to emphasize too, for 8 years and to today is our tagline, but it's because our full tagline is shifting the focus from patient to person, making sure that people are seen and heard and valued as people, and people first, though we all at times may be patients, unless we're inpatient in a hospital, in a gown, hooked up, getting our vitals taken, we may not feel like a patient in that moment. And it's important to also be regarded as people. And so we presence that with the work. So that's a great way to stay involved. And I think in the next segment that we're going to do, we'll also talk about a fund that we've been running called I Stay Home for Rare, which really relates to COVID-19, and a relief fund that we started for members of the rare disease community in the United States. So that's a terrific way to get involved too, which is istayhomeforrare.org. And I think we'll get to talk a little bit more about details of that in the next segment.
Well, great. Before closing, we do want to take a moment to thank our guests. We loved having you guys here. We really appreciate it today. Thank you. Part of our show includes the Rare New England in Motion segment. Rare New England in Motion is a perfect way to expand upon our mission of engaging with our community. Select World of Rare Disease shows will be showcased live on Facebook via our Facebook Live Facebook page. Viewers can tune in live to view the show and take part in a live interactive discussion with show guests and members of Rare New England. This is an excellent opportunity for viewers to get to know our guests and staff and have all questions answered. All of our World of Rare Disease shows can be viewed on Rare New England's YouTube page and social media accounts. You can subscribe and follow Rare New England for the latest show news. If you have a question for us, feel free to send us an email to info@rarenewengland.org, and we will include it in our show. Thank you again, Levi and Jeff. We really loved having you. From all of us here at Rare New England and all the patients and families who keep rare disease in motion, thank you for watching. And remember, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, then think zebras. Thanks.